And okay, thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Sierra. Our speaker this morning is well known in Travis County and nationally. You can read about her accomplishments and honors in the newsletter if you have not already done so. I would like to share a couple of more personal stories, harking back to our student days at the LBTA School of Public Affairs at UT. I was only a first-year student when she was a second-year student, but Dana stood out even then. We never had classes scheduled on Friday. Dana took this opportunity to work as a substitute school teacher wherever she was needed in AISD. The living was easy in Austin in the early 1980s, and I'm sure she could have found other employment. I believe this choice demonstrates Dana's commitment to public service. Dana was known for hosting the annual Thanksgiving Day Pig. Pig did not refer to pork. It was an acronym for Pitifully Impoverished Gourmets. I feel this is her creativity and sense of humor. She has needed both to contend with the many changes in voting laws. I'm sure she has insights to share about the latest round of election legislation. Please give a warm MBC welcome to Travis County Clerk Dana DeBeauvoir.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure it is to join you this morning. And thank you, Amy. I really remember those LBJ days so fondly. It was wonderful to be there. And in Travis County, we have made great strides with elections. And I'm happy to say that our Commissioner's Court supports through funding and through, just its policies, just about everything voters need to be able to participate in elections. And we do a pretty good job here of following a lot of the good government philosophies and policies that are promoted by the League of Women Voters, my spirit animal. The League of Women Voters really makes it possible for us to have a goal to look forward to, a guiding light that says, this is the best way to make sure we include all voters and that we have a practice that says, here's how we open our doors, here's the way we provide an equitable way throughout the whole county to access polling places. The one thing that we've struggled with in this county, because it's a problem statewide, is we don't have electronic voter registration yet. We still have a very manual process that is expensive and difficult to manage. And while I'm not the voter registrar and they're doing the best they can, we really need electronic voter registration. Even Arizona has electronic voter registration. We've had a good cybersecurity program for many years, but there are a couple of things that Travis County has already implemented that we're going to talk about in a minute, are new things that the legislature is asking counties to do. One of them is that we already have a paper trail implemented in Travis County for its new voting system. Voters really love that and they feel very comfortable with that. We are such a large county that we cannot possibly conduct an election with just a hand-marked paper ballot. We would be way too bogged down and you would not get results timely. So we need electronic support, but we want to make sure that people feel comfortable that in using those electronic tools, that they feel connected to their ballot and that they have a way to actually have a physical document that then can be audited. And we were the first county, and we're in with the Secretary of State's office to conduct what's called risk limiting audits. And we're going to talk about what is a risk limiting audit and what the legislature has mandated for the future on that. Since 2011, Travis County has operated vote centers. So the old-fashioned notion of voting only in your neighborhood with just precinct voting, we let that go by the wayside a long time ago. And if you vote in Travis County, you get to vote at those large locations called county-wide voting centers. which lets you vote on your way to and from appointments and, closer to work perhaps than home, just wherever you please. And that's worked out to be a good thing. We did not, when we very first implemented the program, we did not reduce the number of polling places when we went to countywide. That was the original intent of countywide polling places, was to cut the locations, because it was originally designed as a Republican cost-cutting measure. It doesn't have to be a cost-cutting measure. It can be just a voter support system, and that's the way we operated it here. The other thing that we did in Travis County that's important is we convinced a lot of our jurisdictions to go with a uniform election date. We tried to put as many of our jurisdictions onto the November ballot as possible. Again, since about 2011, we've had most of our jurisdictions participate in November, including the larger jurisdictions, excuse me, Austin Community College, AISD, the city of Austin, and many of our other cities and schools now vote in November. We only have a few left that participate in the typical municipal date of the May election. So that works out a lot better. It makes for a long ballot, but what we just do is we encourage our voters to be intrepid. Don't give up. Make it all the way to the end of the ballot for the big payoff at the end. Okay, so let's start this morning's conversation with the positive part about what the legislature did, because we're going to have plenty of opportunity to talk about all the bad news that came out this week. And I have to say that county clerks and elections administrators knew back in January that the bad news was inevitable. All you had to do was count up the votes in each of the committees, especially the elections committee, to see that whatever was proposed was going to pass. So this was not a surprise move. The only thing that was a surprise was how bad some of the bills turned out, especially Senate Bill 7. And we are going to talk about that. But before we get to that, let's talk about some of the good things that did happen. There was a new bill that was passed, signed by the governor, that says that county clerks now have to provide to voter registrars from the probate list death certificate information that says that voters who have died, we have to send a special coded piece of information over to voter registrar that keeps our lists more quickly updated for our wonderful voters, good solid voters who have in fact passed away. The good news is Travis County's already been doing this program for more than a year. So we've got all the bugs worked out and we're fine. So we don't have to worry about when September 1st rolls around and this is required for the whole state. We've got it covered. We're already there. The tracking that's going to be required in the future by the legislature, Busey's new bill. We've been doing the tracking that says if you want to figure out where your vote by mail ballot is, you've requested it, but you haven't received it yet, or you've received it and everybody wants to know, but you haven't mailed it back in yet. We're waiting for your ballot. All of that kind of tracking we've actually been doing already for 4 years. So that will be a requirement now for all the rest of the counties to do. There are new identification numbers that are required for that. So we're also trying to keep some of that information shielded so that it's only the last 4 numbers that we try to make public to do that tracking. That's been a bit of a contentious issue. Some people think we should provide the entire number. Right now, we're going to try to protect as much of that information as possible. And there's also a new part of that law that says we're going to split the information and track it according to people who are voting in person versus people who are voting by mail. We've been doing that for a long time too, so we're covered on that new piece of legislation. There's a new piece that says that election companies that own equipment have to disclose if they're owned partially by foreign companies. That's okay. That's a good piece of information for people to know. We county clerks have known it for years because when we purchase they have to disclose that information, but now it's available to the general public. We did have some trouble with some of our folks who said that they would be for bills that were good government bills. And then we would find out later that they were only for them because they wanted to add their own little amendment to it, and that amendment wasn't all that friendly. So we struggled with some of our legislators who weren't as faithful to the cause as we hoped they were, or as they said they were going to be in the beginning. So some good news actually came out of the legislature. There were some bills that were good. They were passed, they've been sent over to the governor, and it's already been signed. So while we're going to talk about some of the depressing stuff, I want you to know that it's not all bad news, and we did need some of the things that did get passed. Okay, and now to the red meat of this legislative session. I'm going to try to talk about some of the other bills that got passed that were bad, quite frankly, very bad news for both people who conduct elections, as well as the folks inside the polling place who are conducting the elections on the ground. These are the election judges that are present inside helping voters with that, not hour by hour conduct of the election. The legislature has raised all of the penalties for making a mistake, from a simple Class B misdemeanor. They're all felonies now. Now we do still have to prove, or they still have to prove intent, that a person knowingly or intentionally allowed somebody to vote or allowed a mistake to happen, allowed an invalid vote to count, or prevented a valid vote from being counted. But Bonin's bill, in fact, creates a felony for the election judge in the polling place or the county clerk counting the ballots, that they have, in fact, committed a felony if they allow that to happen, and if it's proven that they did it deliberately. That will have a chilling effect on county clerks' ability to recruit people to work. We already have a hard enough time for people to do this job. It's a difficult job and it's long hours. So it's not a good thing to have another obstacle thrown in to make it more difficult to recruit good people to work in the polling places. There was a big attack on vote by mail. Vote by mail, and many of you may have experienced, because of the pandemic, your first opportunity to vote by mail. When the governor started attacking people who voted by mail, one of the things I pointed out in our various press conferences was that the people who were 86% of our people who participated for the first time in the expanded vote by mail program were our own neighbors. There were the people who live next door to you. It's just that a lot of our over 65 voters who were absolutely qualified to vote by mail had never done so, because they enjoyed that commerce of going to the polling place. They liked the safe haven of going inside a polling place to vote. But because of COVID, they were afraid of it. We didn't have a vaccine yet. They didn't want to bring anything home to their loved ones. They chose to vote by mail. Many of them chose to hand deliver. And for their caution, unfortunately, the governor accused them of being potential vote fraud situations. It was unfair, and it was dead wrong. Those folks were legitimate voters. And so now there's a lot of bills out there that are, some of them were killed, but some were passed, that say the eligibility for voting by mail has gone up. Vicki Goodwin passed a bill that says if you're pregnant, you can now legally vote by mail, so that you don't have to worry about fighting the crowds, standing in a line, or doing other things like that. But that's about the only good news that we've got for vote by mail. There are a lot of other tinkerings that have been done that say that if your residence address, if you're trying to update a registration, has to be double verified. And that's only going to put an extra step in the process of people who are moving, who have just moved into Travis County or have just sold their house and moved to another address, moved from one apartment to another, just trying to keep up with a proper clean voter registration roll. It's just going to make that more difficult. And if people run into that problem in the polling place, they're going to end up voting a provisional ballot. And oftentimes provisional ballots do not count. So it's another way of making sure that people who try to exercise their right to vote, might not have their ballot counted. There's also a big threat put onto counties that if they don't keep their voter registration rolls updated. So here's the catch-22. You've got obstacles in place to have the roll current, but if you don't keep it current, the Secretary of State will withdraw from voter registrar the Chapter 19 funds that each county is given so that we can conduct voter registration drives. It's a mean world, very mean world. The only thing I can say is that a lot of these bills that were destined to create problems so that voters would have problems keeping things up to date, so that then the voter registrar would have difficulty keeping things up to date, will be taken to court. And while that doesn't guarantee us anything, it does mean that a temporary restraining order is possible. And it could be that these new bills don't get implemented as quickly as the authors would have preferred. All right, now let's talk about the really bad news. Certainly, the worst one was Senate Bill 7. Let's put it aside for just a few more minutes while we talk about some of the others that also were killed that were perfectly fine ideas. One of the ones that I've been interested in for a long time is our student voters. Student voters at UT, our folks who are at UT understand the parking situation. And especially for during COVID, a lot of our students don't drive cars, and they don't have it, especially if they're from out of state, they don't have a Texas driver's license. And there's no good reason for voters not to be able to use their student ID, their photo student ID, in order to be able to vote. They have a birth date on them. They should be allowed. Zwiner tried to pass a bill that said that student IDs could be added to the list. That failed, and that's most unfortunate. Some of the others, one of the bills that should have been supported but died in committee was that the Secretary of State's Elections Division should be on the Cybersecurity Committee. I am a part of that meeting that used to happen about every week. You would get caught up on what was the latest report of cybersecurity risks. And while the Secretary of State was in attendance at those meetings often, they were not an actual member of the working group. That has now, would have changed had the bill passed, but now the Secretary of State is going to have to be a guest sitting in the room just like the rest of us, when in fact they should be a part of the policy for elections. There are more restrictions that are going to be placed on interpreters in the polling place. If you bring your own interpreter in, they're going to have to disclose more personal information about themselves. Why? Just as an intimidation tactic, they're going to have to provide their name and address. And what if the Spanish interpreter is the grandchild of the voter that's coming in? Do we really need to know everything about a 12-year-old? No, we don't. No, we don't. Kane also passed a bill that requires election officers to undergo training by the Secretary of State's office. This is just one more piece of additional training because we're already required to undergo Secretary of State training, both at the elected level, those of us who are conducting elections, and election judges. So this is just more red tape to go through, in addition to what is already required for these folks to perform their jobs competently. Okay. Let's go ahead and go to the really bad bill that we are expecting to return. And that's Senate Bill 7. Everything was really piled into Senate Bill 7. That was the bad news that we kept hearing about over and over. And there are a couple of things that I want to talk about. Pardon me. That are really going to be chilling at the polling place and that are a little frightening in terms of trying to maintain a safe haven, trying to maintain calm. One of the things that current Texas law says is that the presiding judge at the either your precinct polling place, if you're one of those counties who still does that, or the county-wide vote center in Travis County, they have the power of a district judge on election day, which means that if somebody comes in and is disruptive, they're yelling, they're, for crying out loud, pulling out a gun, they're trying to photograph people or record people. All of that is disruptive and intimidating, and it is not allowed in the polling place. And the election judge has the right to call out the person, calm them down, and if all of that fails, then to summon law enforcement to have the person removed from the premises. The judge no longer has that authority. And here's the basic idea of what that's all about. In the old days, it used to be that poll watchers were referred to as the eyes and ears of the people, that even though they were appointed by typically a candidate or a party, that they were a silent observer, an observer who was there as a representative of the people, watching to make sure that all the procedures and all the requirements of law were being carried out. Their job was to take notes and to call attention to the presiding judge if there was anything they thought that was not according to procedure or law, and that they could talk to the presiding judge, but their job by law was to not create a disturbance or intimidate any voter that they thought might be doing something that was inappropriate or unlawful. That has completely been swept under the rug. And I have to say that the description of a poll watcher as the eyes and ears of the people has for a very long time been completely wrong. Since the Tea Party days, so the last 10 or 15 years, oftentimes poll watchers were nothing more than a representative of the party or the candidate. They were not representing the general public. So oftentimes poll watchers in the near past have been disruptive and partisan. Now in the very current, like for example the last election, poll watchers have absolutely been partisan and disruptive, and they now consider it their job to not only follow the law, which says that they can report anything that they disagree with to the election judge, but to loudly and in a very disruptive manner call out what may or may not be in truth a matter of wrong procedure or a mistake or a violation of law to the entire room, including the voter and the election judge, and to do their very best to embarrass and disrupt the entire proceeding. That is commonplace now. They are partisan operatives. They are not poll watchers. They are there to disrupt. The now what the new law says when it comes back, what the law says for, or I should say the proposed law says for Senate Bill 7 is that the election judge cannot say anything to any poll watcher, and that the rules about you're not allowed to bring any recording device, you're not allowed to bring your cell phone into the polling place. That still is current Texas law and it applies to you. But a poll watcher, a partisan poll watcher, can now bring their cell phone, their recording device into the polling place, can put it in the face of any voter anytime they feel like it, and let and talk loudly to anybody in the polling place to criticize their belief. It doesn't have to be real, but their belief that something untoward is going on. This is an invitation to constant disruption and a constant chilling effect on anybody in the polling place. This is a walking future nightmare for any election judge who's trying to run a safe polling place, and it is completely unfair to voters because they will be singled out for embarrassment and disruption. It is the one thing that I am the most worried about, because I expect it to be used in a partisan, racist fashion to chill, voters who are being targeted. Now I am very worried about it. I do hope the courts will step in and do a restraining order against this, wanton misbehavior by so-called poll watchers. These are poll disruptors, and that is their job. They are also allowed to wear a wire, a secret recording device that nobody knows is there. And the election judge is not allowed by law to ask anybody whether they're wearing a wire or whether their recording device is operating at any point in time. I see no value in the secrecy of this poll watching exercise. Nevertheless, it's written in the law, and I do anticipate that when we come back, that those who are opposed to this kind of disruption of the polling place will have no ability to stop this law becoming, or stop this proposal becoming law. You can't just keep walking out to stop these bad approaches. So I anticipate that when the governor calls a special session, we will see this law, or this proposal, become law, and the governor will sign it. Another thing that is going to affect more Harris County, especially perhaps Dallas County. We did not do this in Travis County, but as an elections officer, we will be prohibited from sending out ballot by mail applications to anybody who has not specifically requested it. And there's some question, typically the campaigns and the parties send applications to voters unsolicited, and they say, would you like to vote by mail? And this has really amped up since COVID. There's question as to whether or not this law will apply to parties as well as elections administrators. But right now, I would not be able to do a program that says, would people over 65 like to continue to vote by mail until everybody is vaccinated? That will not be allowed. You can't use public funds to do any sort of program that promotes voting by mail. Okay, I told you about the poll watcher. There's a separate section in there that makes it very clear that the poll watcher is allowed to record, photograph anybody in the polling place, any voter, anybody standing in line at any time they choose. Okay. The other thing about poll watchers is that they are allowed to stand as close as they want to anybody they want at any time. And this was used this past election as a way to intimidate voters, because they would stand right on top of people, implying that they were infecting them with COVID. Now, it doesn't matter whether it was real or not, just the implication was the threat that they had COVID and that they were attempting to pass it on to other people. This was done at the counting station, and you may have heard about the disturbance that was perpetrated upon the Travis County counting station, where people came in and were deliberately standing on top of the workers at the counting station, who by law apparently are not entitled to a safe workplace. Because I couldn't find any way to protect them, I finally had to put all of the people, all of the workers who were working at the counting station, counting by mail ballots and live ballots on election night, in full hazard suits to protect them from the poll watchers who were there at the counting station, because they were standing on top of them. One poll watcher, and this had all kinds of undertones to it. As she was exiting the counting station when we were at the end of the day processing by mail ballots, took her her cloth face mask off, threw it on the desk of the receptionist at the counting station, the elections receptionist, a Black female in her mid-50s, threw her mask on the desk in the face of the person as she was walking out the door. And she said to the woman, "I've already had COVID. Here, I'm gifting you with my antibodies." Now, this is what we are going to see for the future. It was unbelievable. And to add to that, the Attorney General then turned around and accused me as the election official criminal charges of obstructing poll watchers, because I complained about that action. Because I said you cannot throw your dirty mask in the face of a minority election worker, I was accused of obstruction of poll watchers. Okay, let's go through a couple of other of these. Here's the other thing too. Right now, you cannot take photographs, recordings inside the counting station of your fellow poll watchers or of any of the workers who are trying to work counting ballots. One of the poll watchers was flagrantly running videos, snapping photographs of everybody who was working inside the counting station, and refused to stop, even though it was absolutely against the law at the time, to the point where she got herself arrested. And you may have heard about this through the news. We had nothing to do with it. Her fellow poll watchers complained because she was so bad. They called the police, and the police asked her to stop, pointed out the law that says you can't do this. It's against the law. She refused to stop. She was also slamming and banging on the windows, creating such a loud noise so as to be disruptive to the workers so that they might make a mistake. So the police did arrest her. As they took her out of the room and down the hallway, she was screaming and yelling that we were stealing votes and that we were conducting ourselves illegally in the polling place, to everybody who could hear her in the building. And then when they got her downtown to book her, they discovered that inside her clothes, she was wearing a secret wire, recording everything that was going on. That constitutes perjury. So she was then arrested on 2 charges, and she is under, criminal investigation for those 2 charges right now. Once again, the county clerk and the people who were there had nothing to do with it. It was her fellow poll watchers who were so disgusted with her behavior. That will get worse, especially considering that Senate Bill 7 will pass. There's also another part of Senate Bill 7 that is of deep concern. In counties of 1 million or more, and there's question about whether the final language will be 1 million or more population or 1 million or more registered voters. And Travis County is right on the line of 1 million or more registered voters. We're already at 1 million population. And this part of it says that if you're conducting your election via the program of countywide poll centers, in other words, not precinct voting, but countywide voting, that you're going to have to limit the number of polling places by legislative district. In other words, you're going to have equal numbers. Well, what that means is that the poorer parts of town will have their number of polling places reduced. And let me explain it to you in terms that you can easily understand. In our places in town, especially our more rural parts of town, like deep into West Travis County or Southeast Travis County, where there are no buildings. There's certainly no public buildings. It's beautiful hill country or beautiful, farmland. We will be able to find maybe little churches here and there that will open up for polling places for voters. Whereas in some places we've got large, beautiful facilities like Tony Berger Center or the Convention Center or the giant City of Austin libraries or city facilities. If you have one giant facility, that counts as one inside the legislative district. And if you have one tiny little church, that counts as one in that particular district. Well, you can see how that's completely unequal and inequitable. And that is the future that Senate Bill 7 will provide for our different parts of town. So if you're in a poor part of town with very little infrastructure, you will get very little access to the polling places. And if you're in a rich part of town that's heavily developed, you'll be treated just fine. That's what Senate Bill 7 will do for the future. They call that proportional locations. Once again, nobody else can have an electronic device inside the polling place or within 100 feet, except for poll watchers. And they can carry around phones and recording devices and record you with or without your knowledge anywhere they please, and they can be in your face as much as they want. Okay, we do have people who volunteer to drive folks to the polls, and this is both of the parties, a lot of churches, a lot of disability groups often volunteer. It's very common to take people to the polls, give people rides to the polls. For anybody who wants to do that in the future, if you take 3 people or more to the polls, then you have to complete a form that says your name and address, and how many people you took to the polls, how many trips you made, and where you took these people. You're going to have to submit all of that information to the Secretary of State's office. Well, if you're a volunteer with ADAPT or all of that, that's just has a chilling effect on people who are just trying to be good citizens. There's also going to be a limit on the number of, the legislature also got rid of mobile voting places. When we could travel around for just one day and we could go to different places. That was especially helpful for our rural neighbors. People in Manor, we could go out to the Manor school district area and just hold a one-day voting, or Creedmoor, lots and lots of different places. Or back in the old days before COVID, we could go to grocery stores. Those were all mobile voting places. That has been discontinued. Senate Bill 7 will make sure that you never have mobile voting again. And that's kind of sad, because while the grocery stores got to be problematic because of the long lines, there were so many other places in the rural areas that really did benefit. And it did not break our budget when you were only out in those rural areas for one day at a time, or even at our retired living centers, never nursing homes. But in our retired living centers, we could go out, spend a half a day, vote everybody out there at those areas. And often those folks don't leave those areas very often. Take care of everybody, get everybody voted in a half a day. And it was easy on the budget to get all of that voting done. Okay, there's a lot of language that's included in Senate Bill 7 that is intended to be confusing. Like the law refers a lot to, instead of talking about either law or procedure, which is very clear language, Senate Bill 7 refers to protocol. Well, what's the legal definition for protocol? Is it procedure? Is it written in the Secretary of State's guidelines? Or do they mean law? Well, because it's unlitigated and because it's a term that is not recognized by the Texas Election Code or the Secretary of State, nobody knows what protocol means, but it's used lots of times in this as a prohibitive term, meaning that you can't violate protocol, and if you do, it's a felony. So now it's got everybody scared. Well, is there something I'm supposed to be prohibited from doing, and you don't know what it is? So a lot of fear tactics are written into Senate Bill 7. Okay, here's another one that was really contentious, and it will be back. There is a section written into, it's section 3 of Senate Bill 7 that says that video surveillance systems are now required in counties of with a population of 100,000 or more. And it was there was a lot of negotiation about these video surveillance systems, whether they were required for every single countywide polling place, every single precinct polling place, every single early voting polling place, or was the intent of the legislation just for the counting station? And did they mean by the counting station the ballot board too, the signature verification committee too? All of that was very unclear. And by the way, this was an unfunded mandate, because setting up these video surveillance systems for the people who were doing the work, and this was dozens, if not 50 or more people working in a giant room processing, ballot by mail, or on election night trying to get, ballots that had come in from election day processed. Who's going to pay for all of that surveillance equipment? And by the way, what was considered enough surveillance? Did you have enough cameras? All of that will be returning, and we still have no questions about what is considered sufficient surveillance. And then who has access to this surveillance? What is its purpose? What is it going to be used for? What's the level of privacy that is or is not guaranteed for the people who are working in the room? And if you are surveilling people who are in there working, then do those folks have the right to see the video? And perhaps they don't want to be surveilled, and then you're going to have trouble recruiting people to come and work ballot board, signature committee, and come and help count ballots on election night. So this section about surveillance and the video recordings is going to be much more problematic when it passes, because it will. And then Travis County and the other counties are going to have to figure out a way to pay for it and figure out how to not be accused of doing an insufficient job of providing enough surveillance. One of the things that's required too in the new bill is that you have to use data storage, the little, it used to be CDs, now they look like thumb drives that you use to capture all your data when you're counting on election night, that those drives have to be one use only. Now, Travis County has used the one use only. That means that you can't write over them, you can't erase them. We've used those for years because that's the best security. But they are about 5 times more expensive to use than rewritable ones. So it costs your election budget a lot to use those. And poorer counties use the ones that are rewritable. And there are ways to make sure that they're zeroed out before you use them again that are reasonable security procedures. A new requirement in Senate Bill 7 says that all counties have to use the ones that are the expensive ones that are one time only. Well, Travis County won't be harmed by that piece of legislation, but a lot of other counties will have to spend a lot more money to make sure they comply with this new part of the bill for reasons that are very doubtful. I mean, there were no problems before. It's just the claim that these elections administrators were doing something, inappropriate with these thumb drives, when in fact it's just a way to cost money and create problems. All right. Travis County, once again, is way ahead of the game, but Senate Bill 7 does require every county now to have a voting system that has a paper trail. Well, if you're an optical scan county, and you've been wanting to move to a county-wide voting system, offering early voting and opportunities for voters on election day to go anywhere they want, your paper ballot system, your optical scan, is probably going to stop you from being able to offer voters the opportunity to go anywhere they want. And that's because it is too expensive to pre-print optical scan ballots at a sufficient quantity to know for sure that you're going to have the right neighborhood ballot for every voter who might show up at any of your countywide polling places that they want to go to. You're having to overprint the ballot and pay thousands and thousands of extra dollars to guarantee that your current paper ballot, the optical scan paper ballot system can meet the demand for optical scan. So what happened was a lot of counties were planning to use as an interim a direct recording electronic system, which doesn't require you to pre-print. And so if you were trying to make that switch to countywide polling places for your voters, you're going to have to buy an even more expensive voting system that has a paper trail. You're not going to be able to have an interim system. And while that might be a very good idea, what probably most voters, what most counties are going to do is they're going to stop and they're going to stay with their old, hand marked, optical scan system and not offer voters the chance to go anywhere they need to go on election day until they can afford to buy a more expensive voting system. And that hurts voters. This was intended to chill the move to an auditable voter system for countywide voting. They don't want voters to be able to go to convenient places. They want to hold back and stick with old-fashioned voting methods. And that one's a hard one to figure out because it sounds like, oh, gee, that sounds like a really good thing. You have a paper trail. Think twice if you're trying to do good work for voters. This is a way to just ratchet up the cost of doing that business.
Dana, we may have a few questions for you.
Okay, I was going to say, and I think I'm drawing to the end of the damage for Senate Bill 7, and I do want to allow. Here's the one last thing. All right. Travis County got $1.5 million donated from a special fund that was a collection of people, mostly from Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg and a few other people said, no, we want the COVID expenses to be covered. And it cost us a bunch of money. 1.5 million was about only half of what Travis County had to spend for PPE and all the additional expenses. Senate Bill 7 says a county may not accept anything over $1,000 from anybody in any way. And that includes the donation of a building, that includes any rent subsidy, that includes any money at all for PPE. You can't accept help from anybody in the future for COVID expenses or anything else, we're shut off from any donations in the future. Okay, that's the bad news about Senate Bill 7. And if it does come back in a special session, there's nothing to say they can't go back into a midnight session, add even more to the 20 pages that made it worse, and do it again. Okay, I feel so badly having to tell you how bad this is. But I'll do my best to answer your questions about what else the legislature might do for the future and ways we might try to fight it. Few that there are.
So there have been a number of comments about the poll watchers and who watches the poll watchers. So if this legislation happens the way it's written, and there was a link put into the legislative scan, the site that summarizes all the bills. But if this goes into effect, and what role will you play with these poll watchers of whatever ink that where they come from? So what will the county play?
I'm already criminally charged with obstruction. So I did everything I could to stop them before they added this law in that says they have free reign. There is nothing that can be done. The only thing we can do right now is get the word out to these other legislators, to our fellow counties, and say, you put a stop to it, because the Travis County delegation has done everything it can to stop Senate Bill 7. I know they're going to try to break it up into pieces and stop it. At the federal level, the For the People Act, its attempt was to try to step by step at the federal level be able to override each one of these individual egregious elements of Senate Bill 7. But the For the People Act is now in big trouble thanks to Joe Manchin, because he won't support the For the People Act. And so now it appears that it might be dead. So any protections we might have gotten from the federal government now seem unlikely. Protections from the courts, other than temporary restraining orders, with the packed courts, and especially the Texas courts, don't seem likely either. And I'm really out on a limb if I try to go out and make predictions about what the Supreme Court might do. It does not look good unless the public, who is now fully aware, people like you, of what the truth is behind Senate Bill 7, gets after these legislatures and calls them out. Like McClarty, who started taking back some of his support for some of this, who tried to claim that he thought the 1 o'clock souls to the polls language in another part of Senate Bill 7 was supposed to be 11 o'clock. He was deliberately mistaken in his language about that, because this language is found in all of the other 46 states who have passed this same language that came from a national head writer for this. It is 1 o'clock in all the other 46 states. So he knew full well it was 1 o'clock.
So we again, to the question of poll workers, there have been, a number of us poll workers, because of this bill, I have chosen not to participate as a judge or an alternate judge in the election.
I'm sorry.
This November.
I know, Carol. I completely understand your position.
But what can, there's a number of us in the room, this will be recorded and heard again, but what, as normal citizens, and if we want to be involved in the election process, what is the path to that? What do we do to get involved in this election process?
Right. Call the office of the county clerk or go online to sign up. There are actually a lot of different kinds of jobs. So you mentioned election judge and alternate judge. There are also workers. There's also, and I mentioned, the ballot board, which reviews by-mail ballots, the signature committee, which looks at signatures for people who vote by mail, all kinds of election work inside the office that gets the polling place materials assembled, that transports materials and machines out to the polling places. There are lots and lots of jobs. So you might find something else that appeals to you. My fantasy is that somehow the general public, our general voters, are going to rise up and say, enough, your bad behavior is not welcome. And I just have to rely. I still think It's we the people who have to put a stop to this. And I'm not sure how that looks, and I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I think we're all going to have to be brave and stand up to it. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to get in the face of the poll watcher, and I'm going to be as respectful as I can be and tell them this is not okay. What you're doing is against democracy, and it's not okay. And if it gets me in trouble, I already am in trouble. So, oh well.
Well, and I think that states a lot for your dedication to the job. And I think it's time for many of us to just step up and say, let's be reasonable, let's be civil, let's be nonpartisan about this. And, you know, and somebody said, get in good trouble. There is
Yes.
good trouble, but I think we can do this from our perspective as poll workers, and many of us can still be clerks, and we have to think long and hard about being judges and alternate judges. But I think some of us in this room are probably going to step up and do that. How can we help you? What, as a county, do you need support from us in the county, we the people? How can we support you and your job?
You know, Carol, I really do think it is a matter of, you know, now is the time for all good men and women to rise to the defense of their country. It is going to be a matter of us stepping up. We're all going to have to be nice in the face of some really crazy stuff. We're going to have to be calm and civil. And I do think that that the sugar, you know, will stop the crazy. I think if you're nice in the face of somebody who's kind of going crazy, it's like we all have to practice de-escalation. I don't think a crazy poll worker in your face is going to last very long with a whole bunch of people standing around looking at them saying, you need to calm down. You know, this is inappropriate. And I really think that that kind of approach from all of us inside a polling place is the most powerful thing we can do. All of us together saying, no, enough. We as a people aren't going to do this. That's in my fantasy. That's how we cure this until we get support at the legislature from we the people also telling our legislators this is not okay, and the courts figuring out that we the people don't want this either.
Dana, is there anything that we now today and in the next 2 months can do to help?
You know, how many relatives do you have in other counties in Texas? Because I think what's happening is that the public wasn't aware of what was going on behind the scenes at the Texas legislature. And now there is a growing awareness of what they were trying to do. And a lot of people are offended that this is going on. So I think of raising public awareness, talking to everybody you can talk to about, you know, tell your legislature, this is not okay with me. It's not okay with my mama who lives in Henderson County. It's not okay with my cousin who lives in Chambers County. You know, it's not okay. That carries a lot more weight coming from your own constituency from any of those, for any of those legislators. I think it's grassroots, us talking to one another and being as kind to one another as we can. You know, you dumb bunny, you need to wake up is not a message that's going to work. But I care about you, and I know you care about this is a far better message.
And I think that is true on these other counties, and that there's a list of all the legislators that have supported this bill, and a phone call makes a heck of a lot more difference than a letter, an email, an actual phone call, and even calling the editorial board of a small town newspaper. You know, some of these newspapers in some of these small areas have a readership of 4,000 or 5,000. Small towns have 5,200 and below. And so sometimes just a letter to the editor can work in those counties. So if someone wanted to go and look where all those representatives are, and I think this is the time for conversations, very light and simple conversations, and you're doing a good job of that. We did have a question. Let me see if I can.
Power of the pen, Carol. I completely agree with you.
So there was a question on, let me see if I can find it. Oh, the de-escalation training for poll workers. Is there going to be something on that? Because this sounds a little different. And I do have to say, in 20 years of working, I've had only a handful of poll watchers. So
I know.
Is it going to change? What are we going to have training for that?
Yeah, I fear it's going to change. I fear they're being fed this stuff and that we're going to see more poll watchers and that they're going to be crazy partisans. Yes, we are looking at adding de-escalation, and I'm looking at, I've got a person right now working on looking at, are there already training programs out there that we can borrow from? I worry about adding too much content to the training classes. As you know, they're already up to about 3.5, 4 hours right now, so I don't want to add more to it. But I think it's important. And there are police models, there are hostage negotiation models. There's all kinds of models out there for de-escalation. And I want to look to see if there's any of that language, any of that philosophy that we can borrow from. It will have to be short, but I really think there's opportunity that we're going to have for our next set of training classes where we really need to include that philosophy.
So I'm going to address, someone had commented about putting on a t-shirt. I have to let you know that in the polling place, there are no partisan t-shirts allowed. Yeah. We either have a paper apron for you to put on, or I'm going to ask you to go out to your car and turn your damn t-shirt inside out. And
then we had this situation one time, it was a few years ago, where a woman came in wearing a candidate's t-shirt, and we told her that she had to change the t-shirt, reverse the t-shirt or wear one of our little dental robes. And she just took her t-shirt off right there, turned it inside out, put it back on. It was all very exciting.
Yeah, it is amazing. If for those of you that are still on the call, if you to volunteer, well, you're paid a little bit of money. Come on, to be a clerk, it is probably one of the most enlightening experiences of the democratic process, because you really see what checks and balances go into it. And, to have an onerous bill come down and just pound on all of this has been crazy.
It is never a dull moment.
So Dana, I've got to ask, what is probably one of the most positive things that you saw come out of this legislative for you as in your job? What was the most positive thing that is going to affect you every day?
Out of the legislative session?
Mm-hmm. Out of this one.
Well,
I'm going to try to end on a positive note here.
Okay. People are taking better care of one another. And I have to say, maybe it's not so much the legislative session as much as it was born of COVID. And I know there were some badly behaved people, but for the most part, I saw an uptick in people making sure that they took care of one another. And that was really heartwarming. And I think that will continue, especially as we see perhaps some of this abuse escalate. I think we're going to see people step up and say, hey, we're all having a bad day here. Take a deep breath. That is what I saw. So the only good thing I see is I saw a lot more kindness than I've ever seen in the past.
Well, super. Any last thoughts you'd like to leave with us? And does anybody else want to unmute and ask Dana a question? We have a few people left.
I just wanted to ask Dana, are the other county clerks, I live in Williamson County, are they on the same page as you with this?
Yes. Although there's some change in demographics I should probably comment on. County clerks conducting elections, I am a dying breed, and that's not a good thing. You need an independently elected official to conduct elections, because I have the voice and the independence to stand up and fight for voters. So many counties have had their county clerk quit because it can be nasty and mean out there, and they give up. Because when you quit elections, you're still paid the same and you have a whole lot less hassle in your life. And when that happens, then the county appoints a separate office that costs the county a lot more, and you end up with an appointed official who is governed by a board. And that board then has a lot more say over them. And elections administrators around the state have become more the norm than county clerks conducting elections. And we have had to step in and protect appointed elections administrators before the legislature, because what often happens is they get muzzled. Their boards step in and tell them, sit down and shut up. We don't want you making any more testimony before the legislature. So while they are concerned about voters, very much so, and they want to protect voters, they are not independent, and they do not have as powerful a voice as an independently elected official. So we have to be careful about switching everything to an appointed official.
So I have just a comment, and long before all of these things are becoming a reality, one of the duties of an election judge in a precinct was to make sure that I had a Spanish-speaking clerk at all times. And it was my responsibility to recruit that clerk. And I just, while I liked being a judge and getting $13 an hour as opposed to 10 or 11.
Yeah.
I just found that particular requirement too onerous, and I never worked the polls again.
Well, I'm sorry. Sometimes it is hard, depending on where you live, hard to find somebody who speaks Spanish in your area. That's one of the things that was really helpful about county-wide polling places. It made it easier for us to step in and find somebody who was willing to go to a countywide polling place. So the office has been more helpful to people in finding Spanish speakers. It's not so much the exclusive job of the election judge to find somebody, since we've gone countywide. Because gone are the days when the Spanish speaker had to reside right in that precinct. We don't have to do it that way anymore. So it's a little easier these days, but it's always been a challenge. Now that we're no longer under the Department of Justice, which is also not a good thing. The requirement, we're not going to get sued if we don't have it, but we also failed to provide that support for judges. And then of course, voters are now under extra scrutiny, because if they bring a child or a neighbor or somebody to help translate for them, that person then has to fill out extra forms and reveal their identity, and all that gets turned over to the Secretary of State. So that's chilling if a Spanish speaker wants to bring their own person. It's difficult. I agree.
Is from experience, the Travis County has an extremely well-run election division, and I think all of us that have ever worked in the polls appreciate all of the time and effort that you guys and your entire team put in, because it is a onerous task to put all this together. And unless you've been on the inside of it, it's just a crazy time. But I really, really thank you for your time. And we look forward to watching you as you go through your trials, your turmoil and your trials. Of what you
I'd like to do this job some more. I'm not ready to quit yet.
Well, we offer our support, and I know as a speaker, that you are now a member of MBC. So we, you would get a coffee mug, but we'll have to just postpone those giving of coffee mugs until we're actually back at Chez Z's in person. So we look forward to seeing you. Please drop by on any of our meetings, and if you ever need us for anything, you can always reach out to the membership, and we're here. Okay.
Well, thank you. I'm going to come to Sharon Watkins' restaurant and eat breakfast.
Will you come with us? We got lots of bacon, because we like bacon in this group. It's kind of a joke around here. So we look forward to seeing you, Dana. Thank you so much. And guys, I'm going to log off here. And
thank you. My pleasure.
Have a great day today. All right, Ned, you can leave the meeting for all of us. Got it.